All right, let's see if I can do this. Got a sailplane set up here. And we'll go down to system setup. And by the way, is there anybody that doesn't understand what that's telling you? It's telling you it's fixing to turn the RF module off. And if you got an airplane sitting there, an electric airplane, that's powered up, and the motor fail-safes to full throttle, what do you think it's going to do when you say yes? So think about it before you go in there and be sure there's no prop on that airplane. All right, so back to the subject at hand. We got 4 servos. So this is what's called a 6 servo airplane. It has 4 on the wing and 2 in the tail. And I've got switch C set up to control the motor. And the tail is normal, 1 elevator, 1 rudder. So let's go back and go down to flight mode setup. And notice it says at the bottom, mode is 3, and it says land. I have the throttle stick all the way down. I'm gonna raise it. Now it says 4 and thermal. And I'm gonna switch the B switch to the middle position. And now it says 2, which is cruise, and then 5, which is speed. Now I'm gonna flip switch A to position 0, which is the priority switch for launch. And notice that it says 1 and launch. So we have 5 flight modes. It says there are 5 flight modes on the second line from the bottom. So flight mode 1 is launch. Flight mode 5 is speed. 2 is cruise. 4 is thermal. And if I pull a spoiler stick, throttle stick down, number 3, flight mode 3 is land. So we have 5 flight modes, 1 through 5. It's not skipping around and using flight mode 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, whatever. So when you go over here to set up the flight modes, notice I have the throttle stick as a second switch. It doesn't have to be the 3rd switch, and that's what Sherman uses, I believe, in his deals. Skipping switch 2 and using switch 3 instead scrambles the flight mode numbers. And you can unscramble them, but there's no need to. Just set it up like this. So position 0, switch A is launch. And so now here we are. If you scroll and highlight those modes right there, you can see what it's doing as you move the switch. And of course, with the throttle stick all the way down, no matter what I do with the B switch, we're in land mode, landing mode. So I'm gonna raise the throttle up. And in the middle position, remember the throttle's got a 3-position switch on it. So now we're in the middle. And again, you have to set those 3 flight modes to say land. And then when we pull the throttle stick on up, push it on up, now we're in the first column, where now the B switch lets us pick thermal, cruise, and speed. Now, if I hit the scroll wheel, see launch, there's a launch that says number 6. We don't want that one. And there's a cruise that's 7, and 8 is land. So there are duplicates because there's 10 flight modes, and you can name them anything you want to. But if you're gonna have 5 flight modes, use the first 5, 1 through 5. 9's set to thermal right now. And you change that in the spoken flight modes screen. You can change the name, but the numbers, that's what they are, okay? So if you're gonna have the first column be thermal, cruise, and speed, use the first speed you come to, which is number 5, and hit enter. And if you flip the switch to the middle, there's cruise. And so see, if I change it, see, launch is 1, this is cruise number 2, land number 3, thermal number 4, speed is 5, and then here's a launch that's number 6, like we saw just a minute ago. There's a 7 that's called cruise, and land that's an 8 that's called land, and then 9 is thermal, and 10 is speed. Well, we don't want 6 through 10. We want one of the first 5. So we want flight mode 2 to be cruise. And then if we go to this position right there, scroll all the way to the left, flight mode 1 is launch, 2 is cruise, 3 is land, 4 is thermal. That's the one we want to use, but if we keep going, 5 is speed, 6 is launch, 7 is cruise, 8 is land, and 9 is thermal, but it's not, you know, between 1 and 5. It's not the one we want to use. So back up to the left and pick the first one that says thermal, flight mode 4. So now we have 5 flight modes that are 1 through 5. And it says thermal, but that's because I'm sitting on it. It actually says flight mode 1 down at the bottom. That's the actual flight mode. The name is coming from where the switch is. It says, well, okay, never mind. But anyway, it's set up the way it ought to be. So you pull the throttle down, see all of these lands are flight mode 3. Put the throttle in the middle. All of these lands are also flight mode 3. So we're using flight mode 3 for land. And if we push the throttle up, we're using flight mode 4 for thermal, flight mode 2 for cruise, flight mode 5 for speed, and if I throw switch A to 0, now it says mode 1, but it's saying whatever the B switch is set to. So you can't go by the name right there when I'm in override. That's just the way it works. So let's back up. And let's go back to the list. Now, spoken flight mode. All right, you can name the flight modes anything you want. But if you only want 5 flight modes, use 1 through 5. Don't scroll the wheel to the right until you get to 6, 7, 8, or 9, or 10. You don't want to go that high. So, at any rate, that's that. So let's back up. Now, channel assign. Well, let's go to trim setup. Okay, so aileron and elevator are set to F mode trim. That means as I switch B and A and the throttle, and the flight mode changes between launch and land and speed and cruise and thermal, in each one of those flight modes, I have a separate aileron and elevator trim that I can adjust, and it uses the same trim levers that it would use normally. So you don't have to have 5 different switches for each one. It uses the same switch. It uses the same trim lever in each flight mode, so that's handy. If you're in a certain mode and you move the aileron trim or the elevator trim, you're trimming it just for that mode. If you flip the switch to a different mode, you can use those same trim levers again to retrim the airplane. So you can keep the plane trimmed in all 5 flight modes using the normal trim levers. Now, the left trimmer is also set to flight mode, which means the left trimmer has 5 memory locations to where it can remember what I have the left trim set to in each flight mode. So I can use that left trim switch to set the AS3X gain in each flight mode. So if we get out of this, let's go to channel assign and show you where I'm using these. I'm using the left trim, the analog version of it, for the AS3X gain. You don't want to use the digital because it only gives you plus or minus 29 or 30% travel. The analog setting gives you minus 100 to plus 100, so you can go from 0 gain to 100% gain. And so that's what you want. Left trim A. A is analog. So we back out of this. And so let's see, what can we do next? Let's get out of this.
Thermal mode.
And see the flight mode is shown on the screen and it's announced. So you know what mode it's in. Now if I go to monitor screen, watch what happens when I change the B switch from thermal to cruise to speed. Watch channel 9, which is aux 4.
Cruise mode.
Okay, in cruise mode, it's reading what? Is that 50%? Yeah, it's hard to read this. So 50% would actually be 75% of the gain that you've set. So in thermal mode, it goes to 0, and we have no AS3X gain in thermal mode.
Cruise mode.
In cruise mode, we have plus 50, which is 75% of the gain.
Speed mode.
Speed mode, we lower it to 0, which is 50% of the gain. And if we go to launch mode,
Launch mode.
it's set to 0, which is 50% gain. And if I pull the throttle down to landing, no, I've got to come out of A switch.
Landing mode.
Okay, landing. So now we got plus 30. To figure out what percent that is, the bottom half of the indicator is 100. And so we're at plus 30, so that's 130. So you take 130 divided by 200, which is the total range, and that's the fraction that gives you the percent of gain you've got. So 130 by 200 is what? Figure it out. I don't have my calculator handy. In fact, I'm using it to record this. So anyway, so now you can see that I have
Speed mode.
5 different gain settings
Cruise mode. Thermal
based
mode.
on what flight mode I'm in.
Launch mode.
See? So
Thermal mode.
I don't need 5 different receiver flight modes for the gyro. If I'm only going to use AS3X, I can use channel 9 to set the gain for each flight mode. And I don't need to switch the receiver's gyro from one flight mode to another to have different gains. The only reason I would use a flight mode channel like channel 8, I'd put it on a 3-position switch, and I'd use it to turn the gyro off and set it to AS3X mode, and to set it to safe mode if I was going to use safe mode. If I'm not going to use safe mode, I don't really need an off, because I can switch the left trim switch all the way down and I've got the gyro turned off, just like it is in thermal mode. So I do have a way to turn the gain down to 0, even though I don't have a toggle switch to change to a flight mode that has the gyro turned off. So I would only use a flight mode channel for the receiver if I wanted to use safe. I don't need it for AS3X. If AS3X is all I'm going to use, I only need one flight mode in the receiver. I don't have to set up a flight mode switch or channel. All I need to do is set up variable gains and use the left trimmer and the analog setting to control the gain, using flight mode trim to give me 5 different gains, one for each flight mode. So that's not so complicated. What else can we do? I really didn't set up anything else. This is mainly all I did. Of course, differential, you see, you set it to flight modes. And so in each flight mode, you can have a different differential setting. And then if we go back to rates and expo, notice that the flight modes are 1 through 5. They're not scattered about in the bottom part of that screen. They're, you know, in order. And you can have a different dual rate and expo,
cruise mode, speed mode,
for each flight mode. So that's quite handy. And if we back up and let's see, what else have we got? Analog switch setting. Where's the marker? There's the marker right there. Since the throttle stick is actually the spoiler or flap switch,
landing mode,
you can set
speed
this
mode,
to the
landing
point
mode,
where you want it to switch between the 3 flight modes and landing.
speed mode,
So you can choose the point where it starts lowering the flaps or going into crow or whatever you're doing with the spoiler stick, as they call it. Camber presets, here again, it has one for each flight
cruise
mode.
mode, thermal mode, cruise mode, speed mode,
Since it's a sailplane setup, it knows what to do with the flight modes for camber. And then you got camber system, and again, it's automatically using the flight
cruise
modes,
mode, thermal mode,
and you can set each one the way you want it in each flight mode. Pretty simple. Mixing, you may want to add a mix for aileron and the rudder to help it turn. You can do that right there. It's already set up for you. All you got to do is go in there and set it. And the other thing is, when you go in here, you can set the switch to flight modes, and then you can set a different amount of aileron to rudder in each flight mode if you need to. You may want more at slower speeds and less at higher speeds. I don't know. Just depends on what you need. You got elevator into flap and flap into elevator. You can also set that up on flight modes. So this transmitter, even though it's old and just about obsolete, it has a lot of features that are still very useful. So it's not time to throw the DX9 away yet. It's still a good radio. So anyway, I think that's pretty much it. Servo setup, I'll say a few things about this. I don't like turning the travel down below 100% because it makes the servo rotate less, and it decreases the resolution of the transmitter, and the less the servo moves, the less resolution it has. So I would try to leave these at 100%. If you want to turn them up for more throw, you can go to 125, but I wouldn't recommend going beyond 125. And of course, sub trim is to get the servo arms perpendicular to the push rods. And then reversing, of course, to get everything going the right direction. And then speed and absolute. So anyhow, rates in Expo, if I set the rate to whatever I set the rate to, I set the Expo to either 1/4 or 1/3 of what the rate is. So in this case, I would set this to 25%, which is 1/4 of 100. If the plane has large control surfaces, I would set this to 33, or 1/3 of 100. And if the dual rate is 80%, I would use 1/4 or 1/3, depending on the size of control surface. So I do that to soften the controls around neutral. I hardly ever have to change them from that too. It works just about on any kind of airplane. Let's see. So motor cut, be sure, and all you have to do here is select the switch and flip it and hit enter and get out. You don't want to change the 1 and 0. The default is the correct way to have it. Where on 0 the motor runs and on 1 the motor is disabled. So anyway, that's pretty much it. So there you go. Maybe that'll help you out. Good luck, and thanks for watching.